Okay, good evening, everyone. Uh, we are a little late this evening, and my camera's a little fuzzy this evening, but we're going to soldier on. At the moment, if you're in chat, we have a poll up. Uh, should Hetman be forced to watch Would Faultist's dating video in retribution for making us wait so long to start this evening's stream?
I I I, I kind of want to watch that. Are you serious? Did he actually make that?
Oh, he did. He did.
Okay, well, I'd be more willing to watch that than one of his historical videos.
No,
Did he
no,
make?
it's
Does he have his
actually
map?
it's actually probably almost as bad. Uh, anyway, so tonight we are going to talk about some of the monumentous, I suppose is the word, events that have happened recently with the intelligence leak for Ukraine's war effort, and uh, we're just going to generally talk about Bakhmut a bit, especially with the Russian offensive petering out and Ukraine probably going to be starting an offensive of their own soon. Uh, but before we get really started on that, outside of the leak, have you heard anything interesting from Ukraine lately?
Um, from Ukraine, not a lot. I just know that the situation. Well, I know that the situation in Avdiivka is getting worse. They've actually transferred some Wagner units there. Um, and we keep saying it, but it's very likely that Bakhmut will fall in the next month unless they launch a offensive in that direction, which is possible.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll look at that a little bit more
yeah.
later on. I was reading
The
yesterday's, and I read some of today's, but I was reading yesterday's ISW report. Uh,
How was it?
Ukraine captured intercepts from Russia that they are now forming Storm Z companies, which are small units of about 100 men set up to try to help them take territory in the Donbass. They're giving these people 15 days of training and expecting to attach them to assault units.
So these are essentially like a Russian besieging force.
I think the intention actually is to harken back to the concept of stormtroopers in the Brusilov offensive from World War One. Um, this
It,
small, light, compact
does
force.
Imperial Russia have storm uh storm units like that? Stormtroopers?
They developed so in 1916. You're obviously knee deep in World War One in a pretty static situation, and the Russian General or Field Marshal Brusilov developed a system where he used light, fast units to break holes in trench lines and then exploit them, which is actually marginally successful at gaining ground in World War One, which was not something you could commonly say. Um, it ended up being an incredibly high casualty event for both sides, and pretty much directly contributed to the collapse of the Russian army the following year. Uh,
That's why it's kind of raising eyebrows with me. These are company size units with very little training.
they're under
So
strength company size units too.
yeah, under strength company, a full strength company would be about 300 or to 400 guys, right?
150 to 200.
Yeah, to 200. So yeah, it's an under strength
And it
company.
really depends on the country, but yeah.
Hmm. Um,
I don't necessarily think this is going to be a successful gambit. They're mostly seeming to be from the reports supplementing DNR forces.
yeah, the DNR have taken heavy casualties. Um, they've had their units actually like gutted, and the problem is the DNR and LNR they carried out a more, how should I put it, a more forceful mobilization campaign than even Russia did. Like, I mean, to the point where they were literally dragging men, um, out of the streets
Well,
to
I don't.
join their armies. And since then, from what I've heard, actually, is they've been filling DNR and LNR uh, holes in units with Russian mobilized personnel.
from a completely practical standpoint, the LNR and DNR have basically been Russian troops all along,
For the most part,
with
it would be
forced
wrong to say
conscripts,
that. It would be wrong to say that entirely, actually.
with
They
forced
are
local
certainly, they were
conscripts.
organized. They were organized by Russia when the war started, but as far as, and actually commanded mostly by Russian officers at the start. But you should not underestimate the fact that a lot of them are from that area. They're from the Ukraine. They're from
Well, yes.
the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast.
So what they really are compressed conscripts
Hmm.
commanded by Russian officers and paid by Russian war chests. Uh,
Have you watched any of the Russian POW interviews that Volodymyr Zolkin and I forget who else does it. He's a journalist, or like, I don't really know his credentials. And I actually am not sure of the legality of what he does. I mean, they grant their consent to be interviewed. At least that's what is said. But what is interesting is a he conducted a, like, basically like a history lesson for some of the captured Russian and DNR LNR personnel. The people who were most combative and, kind of, you know, unrepentant were the DNR and LNR personnel, because their experience, I don't know how I should put it, but in 2014, in 2015, when Ukraine was learning how to fight, and sort of, it's when, that old Soviet influence is stronger. That, and, the fact that it's a common tactic of the Russian military, and as well as their proxy forces, to fire, with self-propelled guns or artillery from populated areas, um, essentially to use human shields. And a lot of these people, they don't have a good like a positive attitude towards Ukraine, especially over these last 8 years. So that's one of the, that's one of the issues I have, in terms of, it's one of the issues that I have with Ukraine's objectives in this war, because it's going to be a lot harder for them. It's easy to retake territory that, was captured after February 24th, but the, pre 19 or pre 2014 territory, that's going to be a whole nother challenge, and then reintegrating them is going to be a whole another challenge. It's not that it can't be done; it certainly can be done, but I'm not sure.
there would have to be uh, a rapprochement type situation.
There would certainly have to be, and I'd almost state that
You'd probably have to
Russian,
go more on the end of reconstruction, post Civil War reconstruction, uh, light finger touch with the
yeah,
entire
you would have to,
situation.
with those regions, and Crimea too.
I
Um,
don't necessarily. Uh,
and a lot of
Donbas,
Ukrainians are not, like, a lot of people within Kiev, they're not willing to make those compromises. They
Don,
would have to,
yeah,
though, in order to reintegrate those regions. And one of those compromises would be Russian being an official language in those regions. At least, it's already de facto. Every Ukrainian knows Russian, at least. I was actually today, at a just a Armenian kebab restaurant, just like right by my house, and a man walks in there and is talking Russian with the owner, and then he says to me, I think he overheard me. I was with my friend, and he overheard me say some swear word or something in Russian, and he said, "Can I sit here?" in Russian, and I asked in Russian, "Where are you from?" and he said, "Yeah, z Ukraini. I'm from Ukraine, and I'm from Lviv region." And what amazes me is even from
That far
there,
west.
he still uses the Russian as a lingua franca. Um, so people, especially of our age, they know it very well. A lot of the kids know it too because for a long time, your television shows and books were written in Russian. But it's less about the language itself, but more just the identity of this region, the cultural identity, which is my advisor wrote a lot about Donbass, and it's sort of an interesting identity. It's the area that attracted migrants from different parts of the Russian Empire. A lot of people escaping persecution and escaping criminal charges to work in the mines because the mines provided an amenity, and you know what I'm trying to say, amenity. Um, so it developed a character its own. The vast majority of people there are what you would call ethnic Ukrainians, but their identity is certainly different. And for example, uh, a friend of mine, her name is Tarasuk, is her last name, which is a very Western Ukrainian surname. But her father, who had that surname, grew up in Donetsk. And when this war
Okay.
started, he put up the Z profile on his Facebook. And needless to say, her and Nastia, my friend, him and Nastia are not talking anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I don't necessarily think that it's an insurmountable challenge. I also don't think it's a challenge you need to worry about right now.
no, it's
Uh,
not. In the near term, it's not. It's far off, very far off. Quite honestly, it's if it happens. What troubles me is the defense in depth that Russia has created over these last few months, not few months, but since the summer. It seems like unless there's like a gap, which I'm sure there is, that the Ukrainian armed forces knows about, it's not going to be an easy, this isn't going to be another Kharkiv offensive, like surprise, overwhelming attack.
I don't. Hang on.
I think that any gains that will be made will be very limited in scope, and they're going to come at a high price. And that's a high price too that is not beneficial for Ukrainian forces. So if I were commanding them, and I'm not a military, I don't have a military mind, but I guess the logic in my mind would be to focus it on an area where they can have the most success in a small area and then consolidate what they have.
There is a. Let's put a pin in the counteroffensive for the moment because
Yeah, it's
the
too.
the Ukrainian war leak kind of informs the counteroffensive. Uh,
That's the thing, though. There's a lot of questions about the leak. There's questions whether or not it was released by Russian intelligence. I mean, actually, like crafted by them, but I don't think that's the case because already the Pentagon's investigating it. I think that it is their doing, but some of it has been doctored. I don't know if you noticed
yes,
that.
they doctored the casualty figures, which makes
They
me
did,
think.
which was very, very funny.
Yeah,
Um,
which makes me wonder who released this and why, because
yeah,
doctoring the casualty figures seems like it's only really an issue if you want to have this consumed by the domestic Russian audience.
of course.
Uh, and the way they released it, like releasing this through Discord onto Twitter and Telegram, is strange
It is, yeah.
because if I have a direct line to Russian intelligence, I would give it directly to them and not release it out into the world. Because if I release the intelligence out into the world, right, everyone now knows what's going on. Like everyone knows there's been a leak. So now Ukraine is uh, encouraged to change their planning that uh, a- to the best of their ability at that point. Like this is a really it's a really weird choice. Like it doesn't strike me as this was Russian intelligence at all
That's very possible.
because it doesn't make sense to do it this way if it's Russian intelligence.
My friend Professor Rish is of the opinion that it was shout out to him, by the way, that it was a Ukrainian, possibly um, Ukrainian, counterintelligence operation.
Maybe.
Um, that's very possible, but you know, designed to throw the Russians off, especially maybe in terms of like in these documents you see information on the brigades, or I don't know if they're
They're brigade
is it
elements,
regiments,
yes.
brigades? Yeah, that they're forming and the forces that they plan to attach to them, which would be
That
very useful information for Russians, for the Russian military to know.
yeah, but
But
I'm not entirely certain like it's information that Russia's going to get anyway.
of course, yeah,
So what would normally happen in the general course of a fight is you say you're a Russian soldier.
yeah,
Um and you're marginally competent at your job. What you're going to
yeah.
do, uh, what you're going to do is you're going to go, oh, we're fighting this unit, uh, and we see who they are, what they've got going on, what equipment they have, and we're going to report all of this back. So then some GRU specialist picks it up, looks through it, and builds a profile of who that unit is fighting in that sector of the front. So that's information they're going to get anyway. I'm not sure that's as useful, nearly as useful for Russia as all of the munition expenditure information, like how many HIMARS are being used, when, where, and all that other information that came out in this report.
You know what? Um, and this is just something, I'm used to looking at, when I've seen classified reports, the old sort of Cold War style classified reports that were made by, like, with typewriters. And this is like, got a very modern sort of aesthetic to it. And it makes me wonder, do you think that I mean, this is a genuine document, that it's not some sort of forgery?
So the Pentagon is under the impression that it is. Um, Russia's forgeries of NATO documents have been hilariously bad in the past.
That's what I was just going to say. You can usually spot
Like,
dramatic
like for
comparisons.
example, a couple months back, they forged a document to try to claim that the United Kingdom had staged a raid in the Zaporizhia area. However, they used an American Army counseling form. Like I looked at the thing, I'm like, wait, I've seen this many, many times. This is the American Army counseling form. The United Kingdom doesn't use these. Like you didn't even check the header that says U.S. Army.
As I've said many times before, this conflict has made me really, everybody thought that the FSB and GRU are really, or yeah, are extremely competent agencies. And if anything, this war has proved to me that they do a lot of things very half-assed.
Well, I think honestly, I think what has happened and what was probably happened with this to a certain extent too, uh, is there's an incredibly sense of Russians being jaded by things, and there's this kind of sense that Russian intelligence and Russian military uh, don't really try in any real sense. Like they don't feel threatened enough to try, so they're perfectly comfortable with telling like Putin what he wants to hear. Um, and they don't have that particular sense of, oh God, we are the only line of defense for the country. Uh,
No, they don't, because
because
their wars currently are just bullshit. They're
so
not.
so we had this particular the dichotomy of Russia realizes they're in trouble in the 90s when they have the Chechen wars, and then they do this reform, and apparently this is supposed to be the reformed Russian army, and it's not it. This isn't. This might actually be, I don't know, like it's hard to put a number to these sorts of things, but it might actually be worse, a worse showing for Russia than in the first Chechen War.
Oh, you mean in terms of like
Casualties
casualties? Oh, way more
in terms of
casualties.
operational coordination and
The
success.
first and second Chechen wars together, as far as troop losses, they're very high. They're in, in the tens of thousands, like in 20,000 maybe. Is some of the numbers I have heard. I know in the second one, by about 2006 or 2005, when it had more or less become a complete insurgency and very, the fighting had died down a lot. Um, the committee, which I think they're banned now in Russia, it's the Mothers of Russian Soldiers Committee or something like this. They reported sort of 13,000 missing sons in Chechnya, and I think that it's a very high number. It's higher than the official total of Afghanistan.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, this current war, if the figures even at the low end are true, so I think 31,000 was the low end, and then like how high was the high end? Something like 60 or 70.
well, there's the
Um,
high end, and then there's the Ukrainian general staff's high end,
the
uh,
Ukrainian general staff's high
which
end
is
is
wildly optimistic.
yes, and it's yeah, and it just reeks of Soviet era propaganda style
I
stuff, or
don't
even not even
necessarily
Soviet
know
era.
if that's the case. Kiev Post. Yes, that's what I want. Uh, I don't necessarily know if that's the case because, like, uh, and you sort of get this from World War II studies, um, that you can have cases where, like, pilots or soldiers eagerly report contact and victories that appear to be victories, but are not necessarily uh, genuine
So you mean
kills.
as far as legitimate mistakes, or in a firefight reporting to have shot someone but not seeing the person dead, things like this, like
Yes,
little,
like
that is true. But I
I
know I know a lot about Ukraine. I know a lot about the way that their political style, the way that they carry themselves, and this is just oozes. This
yeah,
it's meant to lift up the spirits of the population, which are in very dire straits right now. They're in a very bad spot, but it does not reflect truth. Um, and I was, recently I was like reading some, this is, I consider it a Ukrainian document, even though this is in Soviet times. But, I was reading the reports from the RICOM, so the Raion Communist Party of this, reporting, or I think it might have been the Oblast Communist Party, reporting basically partisan casualty figures and the casualties they inflicted on German soldiers. And it really appears that they have inflated the casualties that they inflicted. Their own casualties seem to be reported right, because it would be right in terms of the amount of engagements that they were involved in this particular area. But their report of German and Axis ally casualties, so like Hungarians, was way inflated. I mean, to the point where you look at the amount of ammunition and explosives that they had, and you realize that they they didn't have enough ammunition to
uh,
to kill this amount of people, not like realistically in combat. If you're doing it like committing a massacre, like where you're lining people up and shooting them, of course you got enough.
That
But
particular number goes war by war, though. And
yeah, it does. But it reminded me so much of what we see now. And what I thought in my head is Ukraine has changed in this aspect very little. But
yeah.
I understand your motivation for inflating the figures. It has more sort of value for morale boosting.
See,
Um,
so here's
Joseph
the thing.
Stevens, for example, is the same thing.
Here's the thing about casualty figures in Russia. You're not going to get good information out of the Russians. You're not going to get very good information out of the Ukrainians. The only real the only real indication that you have, and this is probably where a lot of Western intelligence services are going off of, is how Russia is reconstituting combat units
Yeah,
and
that's the only way to
the
know.
mobilization. Like the fact that they are now preparing for another round of mobilization suggests that the last offensive didn't go well. And like obviously the last offensive didn't go well because we're all still sitting here talking about it. But yeah, the Ministry of Defense for April 7th, uh which is they put out this morning, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense is 170,000 over 170,000 estimated personnel. And that is wildly optimistic.
Mhm.
Uh I'm a little confused at why we're counting dead cruise missiles as well. But that's beside the point. Uh, because that's Russia's entire stock of cruise missiles at 911
Wouldn't 171,000 KIA be such a significant blow
casualties,
that,
not necessarily KIA.
yeah, but I mean, I think the Pentagon put out a figure of total casualties in the Russian side is approaching anywhere from like I think 150 to 200,000,
Let's see what the
which
Pentagon numbers. I should probably ask someone tomorrow or today. What day is it? It's your tomorrow. I still have on this today. Pentagon
indeed
numbers
it is the
for
day after Good Friday. Happy Easter, everyone.
uh remember everyone, Jesus was a lich, not a zombie. Pentagon estimates. This is August 8th. That's not any good. Where is today's? Britain's Ministry of Defense, February 24th, as of, so 1 year in, it's 40,000 to 60,000 Russian troops have died. Uh, can we get up to the minute? Hang on. That's probably closer to what I'm looking at. Just remember, folks, everyone has to look things up, even us, especially us. Yeah. Uh, so let's go with the 40,000. 40,000 dead. 40,000 times 3 for wounded.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, boop. I am also horrible at math, so we're going to do this by calculator. 160,000 casualties, probably, maybe, maybe, and that's using military
But
science.
it's not insignificant though.
That's using
Look
military
at,
science numbers. So like these are
yeah,
formulaic. I formulaic
they're
that
formulaic, but
plug things in,
even
and that's what I
even
expect.
even something in the ballpark range you know of this, say it's even 35,000. That's as much. Maybe, I mean, there's varying figures with the Korean War in regards to, there's a lot of missing in action, which are almost certainly KIA at this point. Um, but it's around the same amount of casualties that the United States suffered in both Vietnam and in Korea. And the fighting in Korea was particularly intense as far as, when you're talking about force sizes. So it shows that this is a very ferocious war.
Yeah, if we're
Uh,
looking at 30,000 or 40,000 casualties to KIA, maybe 100,000 total is probably a better estimate for Russia's losses.
yeah,
Um, then that's wounded and surrendered and KIA, and like that's probably a good ballpark figure. Russian divisions, so uh, Russian divisions are somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 strong,
yeah.
depending on the formation. It is a wildly variable number because Russia's a wildly variable country. Um, uh, like that's a lot. That's a lot. The fact that they keep having to reconstitute units and put them back together again isn't a good sign for Russia either. Um,
I keep thinking of this Russian. I forget who said it, which literary figure, but you just said Russia's a mysterious or whatever country, but it's like
variable country.
Россию с умом не понять. Uh, you can't understand Russia with your brain. You have to feel it.
Uh, I, I'm not going to be feeling any Russians for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, me neither.
At any rate, um, the leak is not necessarily, I don't think, like it's obviously a problem, and having this leak means somebody's talked who shouldn't have talked, and they're probably going to get in a spot of trouble.
What do you think the motivation for the leak was?
It's really hard to say because the leak is kind of all over the place. Like understanding, like the most significant information, I think, is the timetable for the entry of NATO weapons. Uh,
Yeah.
that is probably the most significant information because it creates opportunities for them to be targeted. The other significant portion that I read through the leaks was that it has detailed information on Russia's, or Ukraine rather's, air defense network.
Hmm.
Those two things in conjunction are bad news.
Yeah.
On
That
the
that
other
has
hand,
me, that's what I was just gonna say. That has me quite worried.
on the other hand,
Especially because they have information on their long range systems, and it looks like they're in terms of like their book systems, their S300s, they're almost completely out of them, and that's not a good situation.
on
And
on the other
it's
hand,
it
all
seems
this
to be,
information
it go ahead.
would have been much more good, effective for Russia in the first 3 days of fighting.
Of course.
If the Russian Air Force had been able to effectively organize a suppression of air defenses campaign, this war would probably be over.
It's the opinion of military analyst Michael Kaufman that
Even Titan.
Russia likely, even if it had focused on an air suppression campaign, given its actual experience level, it probably still wouldn't have been successful at that. Even if they focused it, they could have done a lot more damage, but they wouldn't have suppressed it completely.
No.
And um that's the thing. Actually, very few air forces, and I mean, you have NATO air forces like that are well experienced, with some of the combat missions they had, Libya, the former Yugoslavia ones, but like really the only military with very very good experience destroying air defense, enemy air defense, is ours. you
Yes.
know
Yeah, Titan, if you've got that, go ahead and send it. Because if there's been something else in the last, I'm looking on Twitter, and I'm trying to figure out which one is new information and what Twitter is horrible for this after the initial drop. Uh, and I'm surprised nothing showed up in the ISW report today either about this.
ISW, they have some decent analysts there, but they're not my go-to group.
ISW is very useful for maps.
They're good for maps, but they're not their analysts are not they're not as
Are you still
experienced.
smarting over the fact that they got Iraq wrong?
I didn't know that actually.
Yes, they didn't do so great.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know that they were sort of a neocon linked organization.
Yeah, but you're not going to find a defense group, like, unless I turn around and found a think tank.
Why don't we do that together?
Oh God, let's get this working first.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, we should
At any
smooth
rate,
out the links with this. But I mean, that's something that I've actually put a lot of thought into that. Not a lot of thought because
thanks, Titan.
actually implementing it. But I have a lot of contacts within the scholarly community, and a lot of people have a more unique way of looking at the situation. And I think that we could do some good.
Yeah, well,
In
the problem
these
is that as far as a military thinking goes, I'm pretty pedestrian, uh, and that's just a product of the education, both military and civilian, that I've received. So, like, American Army officer training teaches you to think a certain way about things, and like that's usually why me and other people with that experience come to the same conclusions. Uh, so like that's why I don't have a significant issue with ISW, because we're all sort of working from the same set of documents. I am going to pass this to you that we just got over so you can look at it too.
what through hold on.
Hang on. Copy. I'm going to send it over Discord.
Okay.
Why are no bad computer? Oh, speaking of which, we as an organization now have a subscription to the New York Times.
Really?
Yes, I will send you the password
That is amazing.
at a different date.
I'm very happy about that actually. There's
Because
a
I
lot of
got I got very tired of trying to work my way around paywalls, and I got it cheap. So that I just sent you over on Discord the next document. Uh yes, Toronto, it appears to be classified materials supposed to over the last 3 months in the latest leak of highly guarded national secret. Yeah, somebody is not very nice, uh, generally speaking, about leaking documents. Um,
trying to find the chat box.
go up to
Please
the
don't.
top of the very far right, or excuse me, far left
Oh,
on
there it is.
Discord.
Here we go.
There we go.
Okay. There you go.
The problem I have with this map is I don't see uh, that damn road is not marked nearly as clearly as I'd like.
The sheriff reported U.S. and allied military secrets leaked to them. Major intelligence brief. What's your opinion of Mark Milley?
Uh, you mean as in general, Millie? Um, my chief issue with him happened in 2020. Uh, when he went in uniform when Trump dispersed that crowd. Yeah, actually, Titan, I will in the future. But at a dollar for a month for a couple months, it was not a half bad deal. Um, when he went out in uniform with Trump during the BLM protests in 2020, I was really, really alarmed. Because the very first thing, and I talk about this extensively in the first Political Violence in America video that we did. Um, One of the very first things you're taught in ROTC or West Point or OCS is that the American military is supposed to be apolitical, so you don't appear at political events in uniform, etc., etc., etc. It's
That's what I
kind of
was just going to say. That's a huge.
it's a huge deal. This is like first semester. As a matter of fact, I don't know off the top of my head because it was, over a decade ago that I sat through these classes. But like I think it might even be the first week. Like this is stuff you talk about in the first week or two. Like as you were being onboarded
You know
type
that
stuff.
a significant portion of the officer corps in the U.S. military probably holds unsavory views in regards to that.
I don't know about that.
Well, maybe not the majority, but there is a significant. There's probably a sizable portion,
I think what you have is a fairly even split. Uh,
which isn't a good thing, though. That's not. That does not. You know, that's not a good
we have run
thing.
way off, and uh, we will be talking about this in the future. It's definitely explicitly. Uh, no, but
You're
I know
talking
about
about
End Time Titan.
extremism in the U.S. military.
Political splits and political violence in America is obviously the thing I'm working on right now.
It is,
Um,
yeah, but that's part of that series. I mean, that's a big part you have to cover that we have to talk about
it'll be
because
in part three, I promise.
yeah,
Here's the thing about that. Before, like, while we're on this, here's the thing about that. One of It's always been acceptable in the United States military to be an out loud conservative. It is significantly less acceptable to be out loud liberal, and it's absolutely unacceptable to be out loud leftist.
yeah,
Um, However, I know a whole bunch of people, like officers, who, if they're not necessarily conservative, are at the very least quietly liberal. Um, the most I heard, the most complaining I heard after Dobbs, the Supreme Court case came down, was obviously from women who came and talked to me about it, like Emily and other people, but a number of officers I went to school with who were women were quite incensed at the loss of the right to abortion. Um, so I don't necessarily I also don't necessarily think that the overlap between radical right winger and uh, more benign right winger is as big in the military as it is elsewhere. Uh,
the issue, you know, going with this, and we'll get back to Ukraine, but I know that the issue of sexual harassment and
Sexual
violence,
assault. Let's lay
sexual
it out
assault,
there.
we're going to say it the way it is. Yeah, sexual assault in the U.S. military is very high. I watched a documentary on it. Forget the name. I think you've probably heard of it at least. And I was very, it's disgraceful, really.
Yes, no, it's a considerable problem, and like
In
obviously
your
it's something.
time in ROTC, did you know of any? Did you hear?
Yes,
Did
but we're
people?
gonna leave it there.
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
Uh, yes, but we're gonna leave it there. No, and it's obviously something I'm concerned about. Uh, I mean, both on a scale of friends, people I'm close with, or like my family being in the military. Obviously, and my sister. It's obviously a thing I'm concerned about, but it's also beyond the scope of this evening's discussion.
Or, yeah, let's get back to this.
Let us uh, Yeah, a lot of this. That's why we talk about a Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier in this article. I don't know. Hang on, let me look at that. That's kind of a thing.
Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier.
The United Kingdom's
Is
new
this a
air.
new product?
No, it's the United Kingdom's new aircraft carriers. Well, not
That's what.
new. Uh, they made aircraft carriers specifically to service their F-35 fleet. Um, oh, they got a lot of documents besides just Ukraine documents in here. Okay.
I just read documents about Orban's government.
There's stuff about China. There's stuff about Africa. Uh, there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of stuff going on in there. Let me bring up this map and make you look at it too. So this is Bakhmut.
Yeah.
And I'm going to zoom in here. So here is our principal problems in Bakhmut. This highway right here, T0504.
Is that the? Yeah, that's the one of
This
the
is the
best.
highway they're using to supply.
Yeah.
This is Russia, Russian controlled territory. They have effectively cut the highway. So that's obviously a significant issue for Ukraine.
I'm guessing they've been doing rotation, like withdrawing gradually their forces there. I know that there's talk of it.
They'd have to pull back through the city proper at this
No
point.
one that I know currently, and I none that I've been willing to ask. None of my friends are fighting in Bakhmut right now, but um, it'd be interesting. The thing that I've been hearing is that the fighting throughout the whole line of the Donbass is very heavy in general. Isn't just
That's
uh,
yes, that has been the report.
Crimea is a very contentious area. Um, Specifically, the fighting in the forest there is really bad. Um,
So
Avdiivka,
we checked. I don't know if I sent you. Hang on, I can Titan send something too. I don't know if I sent you the video from the other day that I was watching of Ukrainian tanks.
was it the one where they were using them to clear a trench?
Yeah, Titan. Actually, I had that thought too today, but I was going to say it out loud.
Yeah,
He's suggesting Trump was behind it, and that's not entirely beyond the realm of possibility. It would have been better if he had been permanently kept in prison like a year ago, probably sooner, like maybe January 20th, 2021. Just a thought. Uh, no, sorry, I interrupted you.
yeah. No. But what? Which video with tanks?
It was a video of two Ukrainian tanks and a BMP pulling up on entrenched Russian positions and then firing main gun rounds into the entrenched positions repeatedly until the Russians gave up. Uh, we can't show it on stream because YouTube gets funny about things like that.
Yeah.
Uh, hang on. YouTube gets funny about things like that. But like, I was looking at that, and I had this like shuddering feeling as I watched this video, and it's like maybe 12, 13 minutes long. Yes,
I
okay,
saw that
fine.
video.
You made a conjecture, Hut Titan. It's about 12, 13 minutes long. And like that's exactly what you don't want to do with tanks, particularly these new tanks you're about to get. Uh,
That's the problem with Ukraine's forces. I know that the forces that will be utilizing the tanks have gone through extensive training. They pick their best units to do that. Even so, though, you know, I know, for example, with tanks, a lot of times, even when they get knocked out, they're reserviced. And in that period, say where they get hit by a tandem round, or like their armor's penetrated, a crew member's lost, an experienced crew member. So you replace these losses by people who are significantly less experienced. Um, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that you'll be seeing them used in ways that they're not supposed to be used.
Yeah, I
The
think
thing
that's pretty
with the
likely.
Ukrainian military is it's one in transition, and it has a dichotomy of both sort of, and we've talked about this many times. It has even some of the positive aspects of Soviet doctrine, but it still has many of the negative ones too. And one of that is, these sort of piecemeal assaults, probably ordered by an incompetent officer on his own initiative.
Well,
You
taking initiative is nice.
wrong way. Um, you see Russia doing a lot of the same sort of things, though, the same tactics. Um, I'm not
S-
sure. You know, Here's what I believe. I think Ukraine is they're going to conduct their counteroffensive maybe in the next 2 months. They're going to have limited success.
It depends on what they
But
do.
the success is going to be outweighed by the, I wouldn't call it a Pyrrhic victory. Maybe Pyrrhic victory is the right term, but it'll probably be, it's gonna make people start thinking here. It's gonna make people, many of Ukraine's main backers start thinking about pursuing a diplomatic end to this somehow.
Well, I think it depends on what they do. Like
It really depends. If they're
Russia has
successful,
been so map. I put up a map.
yeah,
So we know where they've established. We know where they've established defensive lines. Uh, and we know where they've made limited success. And where the Russians have made limited success, they have a lot less in the way of defenses.
that's what I was just gonna say.
So
A
here,
lot.
let's like
That's
take a
why
look
I
at
think,
this.
yeah,
Right here around Bakhmut. This big piece here where they've been pushing around north and south of the city to try to surround it. These portions here, especially across these defensive lines, these portions here aren't going to be terribly well defended.
that's what I was just gonna say. Yeah, these
So
the
like,
some of the area that they've recently taken is definitely vulnerable, and I'm sure that a lot of the units there, unless they've done a rotation, are fairly exhausted. And even if they did a rotation, they might not be sending the most experienced soldiers there.
yes.
So they certainly could have a fairly
So
decent success,
I
at retaking some of these areas. And I think that that's probably what their focus is going to be. A lot of people are, they're just in general. There's been talk since the summer about them, you know, attacking South in Zaporizhia, and that's no longer
yeah, that's not really an option.
possible. That's not going to happen.
That's not
But
an
they can
option.
retake lost territory that Russia bled white to take, which would can be presented. Um, you know, it can be presented to Ukraine's backers as
I,
competency, but
I
still
think
though
if
it's
Ukraine concentrates,
maximal. It's the I hate using the term maximalist goals, especially in reference to Ukraine and in reference, because the thing is that in the mind of the people, even in my own mind, of course, everybody wants to regain what has been lost. So many people have died, And that's sort of like the it's a moral imperative, but at the same time, it's whether or not this is possible, and the possibility is very slim. I mean, it's a very, very, especially now.
Here's what
And
I think Ukraine can accomplish in the next couple months.
okay,
I think if they launch very careful and conservative offensives in certain areas where Russia has made ground on them recently, and they use some of these new tanks and they use some of these, especially these new APCs and IFVs, uh, I think they can achieve the effect of destroying a number of Russian units again.
yeah,
I don't necessarily know if that equates out to a win. Uh, but what it does do is it gives Ukraine more time to come up with something that works. And that's probably the best they can hope for.
yeah, at this time, at this
And,
juncture, yeah, for sure, I agree with you
and
100%.
more to the point, that there are a couple of questions I have just from reading through reports is Ukraine does not necessarily share Western analysts' view of what they can accomplish. So, like, if I sit here and say Ukraine should concentrate on destroying Russian forces in vulnerable areas, but Ukraine still thinks we should retake territory, then they're going to have a bad time. But like you look here, like there's an opportunity here around
Yeah,
Bakhmut, in the
I
north of
agree with
Bakhmut.
you.
There's an opportunity to cut off a lot of Russian troops, to surround them and crush them. There's an opportunity here, uh, between, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, and Toresk. There's an opportunity, maybe not as big in a lot of places. There's maybe an opportunity around Voldahar where Russia's been absolutely mauled to pieces.
So there.
Um, like there are opportunities to do damage.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's opportunities to retake
The thing that we're
territory.
not really looking at though is we have to look at you know topographical ge topographical maps. Some of these areas that they seized might be heights, like hills. So it might be disadvantage, so not all of it, but there's certainly areas in this that are going to present a challenge or even an outright disadvantage for Ukrainian forces in terms of, attacking. So, it really depends. We're not seeing a whole lot.
Depends. Hang
What
on.
Google Maps is for, I guess.
There's a way to switch this if I remember correctly. Canvas is from coordinating and preventing Russian from shelling for a couple days. Yeah, delay has been Ukraine's emphasis. And that works to a certain extent up until the point where this actually will work pretty well. They have to do something. Um, a lot of this is marsh. That's the real problem. Is a lot of all of this area is just marshland, and that just sucks. Like
One
this.
thing that we have not discussed all that much is the economic effects that this war is having on Ukraine.
Oh, their
Also,
their economy's screwed.
its demographic effects, which will affect the war effort on their part. We are backing them, but there's only so much that we can do, I think, to sustain it. So the only way I see this whole conflict ending is at some point both forces being fairly tired, sort of a Korean War situation. You start to begin the talks, and the talks might last maybe several months to over several years. Um, and in the meantime, fighting might be static.
It
I
depends.
don't know. It's hard. I shouldn't be making such predictions right now.
This is transitional for us, I think, at the moment.
Yeah,
Russia
what I
launched their
heard from
offensive.
a lot of analysts is this might be the decisive phase of this conflict. What's going to happen in the next few months or over the summer
You,
might determine its outcome.
honestly, it really depends on the ball ends up in Russia's court ultimately. How much is Russia willing to spend to keep this up? If if Ukraine launches its counteroffensive and they are largely unsuccessful, or uh, or they get even a similar success rate to what Russia has had,
Mm,
then it's probably over. Uh, it's probably going to stay in a stalemate for some time.
mhm.
If they achieve significant uh, if they achieve significant damage to Russia, like maul their army pretty significantly, and Russia is forced to fall back or consolidate, uh, then I think they might have a couple more months. I don't think this will end this year, though. I think
No, I don't think it's
even
going to end
if
this
you
year.
are in a situation where
In
it stays at a stalemate, it'll stay at a stalemate.
By the way, I am. I mean, it's not really a secret anymore, but I'm planning on going there to Western Ukraine to attend a wedding of my friends,
Smart.
and I am probably going to make my way at least to Chernigov Oblast to one to pick up some of my things, and then two to see friends. So I'll be able to get a much during that time around September. I'll be able to get a much better idea of what the situation's like, because it's one thing, when I started going to Ukraine and started talking with people, you get a much better idea of the reality of the situation in the country than you would, even talking to people online or like, uh, of course, from what you would see here. And that's something that is going to be very, very interesting. For example, just to let you know, so the first time I visited Ukraine was 2015, and I knew that summer just from talking to people that Poroshenko was not going to win his next election, and that ended up being absolutely true. It wasn't even a close election; it was a slaughter for him, and I knew that that was going to happen. Um, it'll be interesting what I hear from people. I'm already, with my job, I already talk to Ukrainians on a daily basis, Ukrainians who are specifically leaving Ukraine. Um, and it's just nothing really bodes well. The one thing I am certain of, fairly certain of, is that Ukraine will, in its current political state, will survive this. It's not going to become a Russian vassal state again,
Probably not. No.
but I don't think it's going to come out of it geographically the same, at least for a few years, maybe a few decades. And I don't, and I never have been like, like a lot of Ukraine people who are the cheerleaders of Ukraine, they're really naive, I think, about the realities of living there, of, the culture itself. And, you know, they associate primarily, like a lot of the people I know, associate primarily with Ukrainian intelligentsia, with academia. They don't really talk to your average person there and know his struggles. And that's the thing. I've never been, I love Ukraine the way it is. It has a lot of problems and they are improving, but I know I'm never going to be, and I might be wrong, but I don't think Ukraine is going to be like a sort of Polish miracle success story. And in some ways, I don't think it has to be a success. But, you know, that's why I've always been too very, very skeptical, like, about Euro integration with Ukraine. I've been skeptical in terms of, what that will do with, like, especially with land reform laws, with, like, farming and things like this, with that's going to be a huge issue.
The EU is a different can of worms in my mind than
It's a
NATO.
whole different can of worms, and I don't know if it's the best fit for Ukrainian realities. Honestly, I always thought that Ukraine would be better off as, I mean, obviously now that's an impossibility, and maybe I'll be wrong with that, but it looks to be a big impossibility given what has happened.
Better off you
I
there
always thought
there's
that
a
Ukraine, if
noun
it could be
missing.
a successful neutral country,
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
yeah, not anymore.
There's
But
no there's no so Ukraine rested their defense on the concept of the guarantees they got for giving
yeah,
Russia
security
back the nuclear
guarantees,
weapons. That
memorandum.
their guarantee is obviously useless because Russia invaded.
Yep.
And I've made this argument before, I think even to you, the only real path Ukraine has that will secure its future is to be part of a coherent alliance, which might mean lopping off portions of the country to join
Yep.
NATO. Uh,
Yeah.
but
That
I
might
mean, and that's kind of like the other kicker, and this isn't really news, because we knew it was going to come eventually. The other kicker is Finland is now in NATO.
yeah.
Russia has suffered such a profound strategic defeat, even if they won Ukraine tomorrow. All they'd get themselves is another border with NATO. Now they have a much larger border with NATO.
This never was NATO is only a part of this.
I don't really think NATO
It
has
has
as
a
much to
lot
do with it.
more to do with Russian historical perceptions of what Ukraine is.
Yes, I think NATO is
It
more
has
an
a lot more
excuse.
to do with the idea that Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, in the mind of Russian nationalists, in the mind of someone like Putin who comes from the Soviet milieu, but also, is influenced by many of these, these nationalists like Dugin and other people. Ukraine isn't a separate country. These three countries are one nation. That's what they believe. The idea of NATO coming there with bases and scaring them, that's not what scares them. It's more losing that influence, because what they see Kiev as their foundation. It's essentially part of their foundation myth. Um, and the thing is, as backward as that logic is, as horrible as it is, so many people in the State Department and think tanks in DC don't really get that. And they didn't understand that in terms of negotiation either. It's I don't know. There's no good result of it, because as long there, Russia's not going to reform. I've lost all faith in their
Russia
ability to reform.
Russia's going to die as Russia is, and it's probably a generation away.
Hmm, I don't know. I
Maybe
don't
not.
know. I think that
So I think the answer to that question actually is that Russia would have had a couple generations still in it before this war. Uh, this war has
we'll
been
see.
a demographic disaster for Russia.
Russia's already been in a demographic
Yes, but
disaster. Its
this is
population is declining. The main issue is that this. I mean, the thing that I see is that this has accelerated its brain drain even more.
yes, and
Its brain
that
drain can be
that
noticed in terms of its military technology. You can see actually where it's how it's affected it. And Russia, the only thing that could make it reform is it being such a failure that it has to. And in order to attract people back. But the issue is their mentality. And they cling to this sort of 19th century,
Russia, yes.
early to mid 20th century mentality. The one thing I want to say too, and this is something that has enraged me, the US, we, by waging the wars that we did, these specific neocon wars in Iraq specifically, but also with Afghanistan, have lost a lot of our moral capital. We set precedents for people like Putin to act because what he sees, okay, the US is doing this. That means that's how it sort of it validates his worldview. And it also shows, that we're not better than that. And the people that are most vocal in supporting Ukraine now were also the people who vote. I'm sorry, I know you like him, but our president today, he was very vocal and very
Sure.
paternalistic. Have you ever read what he was talking about? I have to send that documentary to that Frontline one about the Iraq War. But
No, no. So here's the thing. Again, as we come back to America, we had two options, and Trump was simply not tenable as a president. He's not going to be tenable again. Uh,
I don't. I mean, I'm not saying like in my own view or not, but I think you're going to see another
I think we're
wave
going
of
to probably.
civil war.
I
I
I
think
don't
it's
think Trump
very
is going to win.
possible that you're going to see a Republican victory, and you're going to see some compromise between him and someone else, and they're not going to be good. They're going to be of that ilk, whether it's
No,
Ron DeSantis or someone else, but they're going to be a
actually,
populist.
I heard very good news. The guy who's responsible for sawing Florida off the rest of the country is almost finished.
Oh, really?
Yes, so very soon they will float away.
And
um,
that's the issue. The one thing too, though, that I do want to mention is I am not sure that Trumpites, maybe in terms of the domestic situation, but I'm not too sure that Trump, that wave of the Republican Party is any worse than the neocons. I find the neocons to be the absolute biggest plague that we have in this country. They've been responsible for the destruction of our economy with the wars that they have waged, the debt that we have accumulated.
I'm
And,
I generally
when I hear people say that Liz Cheney was a breath of fresh air, she is so unapologetic over what her father did. Liz Cheney, I don't even want to get into it. I mean, I don't want to get my temper going, but this person,
too late. Oh, Bluestone is here. Why
if
can't
I
I
were
see
to say
Bluestone?
my real thoughts, it would be something like along the lines of some Stalinistic rhetoric regarding her. So I'm gonna get off that. But to me, the neocons and people like them are the biggest plague to this country. There are going to be how the economy eventually collapses.
Well, that's good news for people like me who want to change the economy. Um,
That's true. I mean, where there is
if you
opportunity,
haven't realized, we have two radically divergent political opinions on this show.
of course. But I mean, you're no advocate of
Am I an
neocon.
advocate of free market capitalism or conservatism? No, no, I
No,
am
you're not.
not.
No, you're not. So I mean, at least in this regard, we can see eye to eye. But yeah, no,
Yeah, I got it on live chat, Titan. I don't know why it's
I
not on
don't.
live
I
chat
don't. I
here.
don't really. Politically, I don't know where I stand in terms of. Well, I know where I stand, and it's certainly not with the Trump section of the Republican Party, and certainly not with
Have
certainly not with.
having escaped our topic for the evening.
It's late.
Here's That's fair. So here's kind of where that sits, and I think this also is relevant for Ukraine. Uh, Trump getting into office is not great for Ukraine.
No, it's not.
Uh,
I don't think. I
but
don't
at
think
this,
particularly. I don't think particularly anything's good for Ukraine right now, to be fair.
At the same time, I'm not entirely convinced that I don't know if there's anyone else in American politics who would have been more forceful of Russia. Um, and there are some pretty significant problems. I was having another conversation with someone else uh, about the United States and the impending kerfuffle with China. Um, and I do not see, especially now with the recruiting problem being what it is, I do not see a situation in which a major war kicks off and we don't have a draft.
Yeah, with a war with China, yeah. Do you think that China in the near term is likely to actually attempt? I believe that any attempt, but even, it doesn't take, say they do it an attempt to seize Taiwan, it doesn't even take them getting to the island to create a major conflict, a
Well,
major disaster. They don't even have to land a single troop there. They can try to do it. And even if their navy gets sunk, the process of doing that is going to lead us to the brink of possibly the brink of nuclear catastrophe. It's going to be a big disaster.
I again, I am a lot less bullish on nuclear weapons than most people. I don't necessarily see them as being useful outside of sitting in silos and making people think they're useful. So if China is building a bigger navy all the time, they have a very large one right now. They
They
also
do, but they still don't have the they don't have the anti the issue is American submarines. That's the
yeah,
bull in the room, or the elephant in the room, and that
they
is
they have
something
actually
that they
two
need to protect
significant
against.
problems. They are trying to build a navy that rivals the American Navy in its capability of being a blue water power projection force. We probably need to expand our navy significantly, as a matter of course. However, China has a big problem. Uh, their most significant rivals are Japan, India, and Australia, and us. India should be a Chinese ally. They fall into that particular sphere of India, China, Russia because of everyone sort of working together on the same wavelength
Pakistan
militarily.
is starting to gravitate more towards Russia. India, with its non sort of, it's gonna. I don't see them drifting away from Russia, even if Pakistan gets closer
They have
or
such a
China gets
significant
closer.
military investment in Russia.
They do, yeah.
One of India's aircraft carriers is a converted Russian aircraft carrier.
Mhm.
Um,
One of
ironically enough,
the
it's
aircraft
a
carriers was one that
I
belonged to
think
the
I'm
Soviet Navy and then the Ukrainian
I'm
Navy.
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure which one it is. I think it might be the Kiev or the Kiev.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's not me mispronouncing
The one
the
thing that
city.
I too that I think the Chinese military it looks very strong, but it hasn't had a lot of recent experience in flexing of its muscles. The
They have
Russian,
gotten into fights with India. Neither
yeah,
side came out well in those affairs.
yeah, but those, I mean, are you talking about the ones in the last, this century, or the ones in last century in 19?
This century, the recent
Okay,
ones,
yeah,
the
yeah,
ones that have
those
happened in the last 20 years.
those haven't been major fights, not a
No,
lot of
they've been
shooting,
little skirmishes, and both sides have suffered
and with
horribly.
pebbles.
The other thing to mention, it used to be a very popular joke that all of China's land navigation points were off the Great Wall, and they all sent out 300 people to find a single point. The I have a feeling that China is going to have a very hard time getting out of China unless they
Didn't
go in the other direction.
didn't um China do pretty disastrously bad when they tried to teach Vietnam a lesson?
Yes, but
It's amazing.
Vietnam is the weirdest story in all of modern history, I think, because they've been phenomenally successful since the close of the Vietnam War at putting their country back together.
Yeah, they have actually.
They had a phenomenal reaction to COVID. They have rebuilt their military. They have done an absolutely amazing job. Like like Vietnam is maybe the come from behind winner of Southeast Asia. Uh,
Thailand, Thailand is pretty successful too, but I mean,
yeah,
with the ground autocracy.
it's Vietnam is doing pretty well for themselves. Uh, man, we have not done well in staying on topic tonight.
No, we haven't.
uh,
That's the issue. Sorry, guys. I'm very, very sorry.
yeah, it's been a late night. So I'm actually gonna have to. Yeah, it's been an hour and a half. Okay, so we're
And
gonna bring it out here. What is a couple things? Hetman is why we were so late this evening. I appreciate that we have people showing up now at the last minute. Uh,
I appreciate it too.
so
And
here is kind of some stuff I want to talk about. I have been doing over channel growth um, and what we need to do, and I got to make a few moves in that regard. But we are at 90 subscribers, and we are fast coming up on 100 subscribers, and that's kind of shocking to me because I didn't really think this would get much traction at all. So I want to thank everybody who showed up and who
I
supported
want to
us
thank you guys too,
so
from the
far.
bottom of my heart.
Uh,
You know, one of the one of my biggest joys at the moment, since the war started in Ukraine, my life has been uh, very, very, and I wouldn't just say unstable, but very depressing. And this has been one of my greatest joys.
so
We're gonna
what
try to bring to you ac- you know, some real experts in the future, and hopefully do more reviews. I think that that's where this is headed.
the other thing I want to bring up is when we hit that particular milestone, because I figure it's actually going to happen now. What we are going to do is hold an open Q&A. Um, Probably not large enough to do call-ins, but if it is, we'll do that. Uh, Hold an open Q&A. If we don't know the answer, we'll find you the answer. So, SWIP, kind of, we're our Discord's down there. Our Twitter is down there. Um, Feel free to start submitting questions in advance while I get this sorted. We are coming next Wednesday, whether Touchgrass is with us or not. We're finishing the last What If Altis video, and we're probably going to do History Legends sometime this week too, this coming week. And let's see, what else did I want to do?
What
Uh,
about our Nerdist episode?
I haven't figured out what we're doing for that yet. If you have an idea, text me tomorrow.
I mean, I got a lot of stuff to say about the recent Star Wars leaks and some of the.
Actually, I watched the trailer for
Did you
Ahsoka
see the
today.
Ahsoka? I'm looking forward to that.
Yes.
I really am, and I'm hoping that they do Thrawn justice. I really do, because out of
s-
all the characters in Star Wars, he's one of the most developed, and I think probably one of my favorite villains in any sort of fictional.
at any rate, we so we'll schedule that too, and I will come out with a schedule, and then we will throw out that schedule because Hetman will do that to me. So thank you
Good job, man.
everyone again
I
for
got
getting us where we are at, and we appreciate that profoundly. The other thing I want to point out is uh, join a, come join our Discord because it's mostly just me talking to my mods at this point, and that's silly.
for sure.
And finally, so yes, we're coming up on that 100 mark Q&A, um, and that is what we will do for that. And then finally, I have begun thinking of the future of this and to start thinking of Patreon tiers. If you have ideas for that, throw them my way too, people. So with that, I am going to call it for the evening, and thank you again, and have a good morning at this point.
На добраніч. Good night, people.